Oh, that's terrible.
Is it recording here?
No, I'm trying to.
Okay.
No, I will.
Okay, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So good to see you. I'm not going to be sitting here for long. Just wanted to welcome everyone here. Welcome to Marcy, we haven't seen in a while. And Denise, who's out in Harrisburg.
Area.
And she comes back here for oxygen.
I do. Fresh air and kosher food.
So just one or two quick announcements before we begin. Number one, our Brooklyn trip is out. It's gone live, and we have a very exciting itinerary for this year. Two new things on the itinerary that we've never done before. Number one is a pottery studio where you can craft your own Judaica items. They do glass fusion, they do different stuff. So it's going to be really cool, and hopefully working on it, hopefully touring a matzah factory. So that could be really, really cool. On top of our regular program of the Brooklyn shopping and delicious lunch on the house and dinner on the house and all that, it's going to be a really, really fun trip, and we hope you guys can all join us. That's number one. Number two is... I had number two. Oh, if anyone has an old smartphone that's not in use and they want to donate it for our classes here, I want to start recording them like this, just like the way you see right here. It's the easiest way for us to upload them, make them available on YouTube, Facebook, whatever it is, so people can enjoy them who aren't able to make it to the class. If you have one you'd like to donate, we'd gladly accept that, and you can see me for that. So today's speaker, Joseph Waslow, is coming in the clutch for me because when we have these big Shabbaton weekends like we had this past week and a couple weeks back for the Shabbat project, a lot of my time gets taken up with the preparations and things like that. So I call my pinch hitter, Joseph, who did a great job last time, and I think we're all going to enjoy having him back here today. So a few weeks ago, after the class, I gave out a feedback form for people to let me know what they want to hear about, their topics, what interests them. If you have filled one out and you want to give me some feedback, I'd love to share it with you. Now, one of the things that was very popular on there was Journey of the Soul. I think almost everyone put that on their feedback form. It was anonymous, so I don't know who did what, but a lot of people chose Journey of the Soul, and it's something that I put on there, taking a risk because I knew I'd have to spend a lot of time researching it before I gave that class. And luckily, Joe chose that topic, so he did the research. And I'm here to enjoy with you, to hear Joe present on this topic. And please give me full attention, and thank you.
Okay, hello everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's good to be back. Shavua Tov. So, there's a couple new faces. My name is Joseph Waslow. I teach in a high school. I'm a high school teacher. I teach kids how to fix cars. All right, so I'm a teacher, but even though I'm a teacher, I still get nervous to speak to people. So it sounds kind of funny, but we'll warm up and we'll get to it. So, I want to give you a little bit more context to what happened. So, Moshe asked me to speak. I said, sure, I love speaking with people. I love sharing with people. I love learning with people. So really, today, I want us to learn some stuff together. I'm not a rabbi, so, I'm, crossing into gray area right now, especially with such a heavy topic. But I want to share with you some things that I've learned. When Moshe contacted me, I asked him, what should I speak about? Should we speak about Purim? Should we speak about the Parsha? So he said the group filled out some cards, and he said he'll get back to me when he goes through the cards and see if there's any trend there. So when he said Journey of the Soul, I just kind of laughed, and I said, yeah, real good one. I'm not going anywhere near that. And I said, what's the runner-up? So the runner-up, I think, was even harder. It was reincarnation. So, anyway, again, I just want to emphasize, I'm not a rabbi, so anything I'm going to say doesn't really have any authority. I want to just share with you sources of things that I learned. Okay? So, let's start with this. I want to share with you, I like starting with a story. have a friend whose son got bar mitzvah last year, and he took his son to get a new suit for the bar mitzvah. And as he was getting the suit for the bar mitzvah, he was trying it on, and none of them fit. I mean, he told me they tried like 4 or 5 suits, and they were not fitting. So finally he said, look, I know you're older, but something's got to be wrong. So he says, let me see how you get the suit on, because maybe you're just not doing something right. So he realized that his son wasn't taking the old suit off when he was putting the new suit on. So by nature, it didn't fit. So I say this story to share with you that before we even broach this topic, we're coming to this with a lot of preconceived notions, that are going to be informed by how we were raised, maybe informed by, spouses, maybe be informed by other things that we look. So we have to make sure before we even think about this topic that we take off our first set of garments to put on the new ones. Okay? Otherwise, it's just not going to fit. It's not going to be right. So, what exactly are we talking about when we talk about a soul? Before we even talk about the journey, what is it? Where does it come from? Where does it go? Things like that. It's important to define what are we even talking about, right? Mm-hmm. So, what do you guys think we're talking about? I just want to ask a couple of you. What is a soul to you?
What's in your heart?
What's in your heart? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Making you alive.
It makes you alive. Okay.
It's like
spiritual energy.
It's like the
spiritual
energy.
deepest part of you.
The deepest part of you. Okay, so it's a very abstract thing. Yeah. It's a very abstract thing. So when we say I like this, I like that, like what do we mean? I don't mean like I like hamburgers, right? That's obviously we're talking about something like that tastes good to us. When we talk about I enjoy watching my kids do something, or I enjoy spending time with my family. It's not a physical thing. Hopefully by the age that we're all at, when we don't have like a doggy pile and we just sit all on top of each other, like when we see our family. Maybe some of us do, and that's okay. But what do we mean when we say I? And if you notice, a lot of times when people point to themselves, where do they point? They don't point to their foot. They point here. They point at themselves. They point at their heart. Okay, why do we do that? There's something that's just kind of intuitive to all of us, that there's more to us than meets the eye. So there's a story that I heard from a friend of mine, and the story involves a rabbi called Shneur Zalman of Liadi. He was from a town called Liadi, and he lived between like the 18th century, 1745, I wrote down, to 1813. He was, I don't know if any of you have ever been to a Chabad house, but he was the founder of Chabad. And his grandson was the third Chabad Rebbe, and his grandson was Reb Menachem Mendel Schneerson. You hear that name? This is not the one who just passed away back in the 90s. He was named after someone else in the family, or someone else. So when Reb Shneur Zalman, he was sitting on a bench, whatever he had in the house. And his grandson, the Tzemach Tzedek, which is what they call him, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, he was a little boy at the time. And he was known to be a very sharp boy. So he walked over to his grandfather, and he sat on his lap, and he said, Zaidi, where are you? And he said, I'm right here. So he pointed and he grabbed his big beard, and he says, is this you? He says, no, that's not me. So he pointed, he grabbed his arm, he said, is this you? He said, no, that's not me. Pointed at his belly, is this you? He said, no, that's not me. So he says, Zaidi, I don't know where you are. So he walks away, and being a sharp little boy that he was, he faked that he fell, and he started crying. And his grandfather shot up and ran to him, and he looked at him and smiled, and he said, there you are, Zaidi. What did he mean? What was the difference? In other words, getting up and running to him was an emotional response. And what are the emotions? Okay? We'll see that the Jewish sources say that our emotions, they call our one soul, our intellectual soul, they call it, is the emotional soul. When you look inside a brain, can you find happiness? Is happiness a place in the brain? If you look at it scientifically, it's just electrons firing. That's not happiness, right? Because the electron firing for happiness is maybe a different area of the brain, but another electron firing for sadness. They're all just electrons firing in our brain, essentially doing the same thing. And this is something science has grappled with for a while, namely consciousness. What is consciousness? Okay. I want to illustrate another point with another story before we move forward. Hope you don't mind the stories. There was a boy in a yeshiva, a Jewish high school, and he was struggling. Everything the rabbi said, he already knew the answer. He said, I have enough of this place. I'm getting out of here. So his teacher, he knew maybe the boy was struggling with something. He didn't know. So he went to another town, grabbed a great rabbi from there and said, I want you to come back and I want you to speak to the boy. So he went to the boy, he came and he spoke to him. He said, asked him a couple questions, and he got up and walked out. And the teacher of the school said, what are you doing? He said, he doesn't have questions, he has answers. There's two types of questions. There's questions that we genuinely want to know what the answer is. And then there's just kind of like questions that we just kind of ask in a smug kind of way that, it's just like a quip remark. We don't really want the answer. We don't really want to buy what you're selling. So when we come to this topic, we have to make sure we're asking a question. Do we really want to know? Or is this just kind of some question we ask that'll keep us out of the synagogue, right? So these are the stories. So again, we have to make sure that let's define our terms a little bit. Like, what exactly is a soul? Now, a lot of people say the soul is it God? Is it part of God? It's very elusive and it's very abstract what we're talking about. So there's a blessing that we say in the morning. And when we say it, we say, my God, the soul you gave me, that you placed within me, is pure. And pure, the word for in Hebrew is tahor. That means pure. It's very interesting that the rabbis who created the prayer book centuries ago, their natural language was Aramaic. And what's their word for pure or tahor? What's the Aramaic word? It's also tahira, which can mean light also. So language informs our concepts, right? So when they thought that the neshama, the soul, was tahira, it was light, it didn't mean light that's on. We see in the Bible when we start reading that God created the world with light. A lot of people refer to the light of God. What do they mean? They don't mean a light switch is flipped on. So we see from here that their concept of what the soul was clearly that it was a piece of whatever this light of God was. Okay? Now, I don't know if we're going to really be able to define what that light is, but it's just something to have in mind that their concept wasn't this kind of hocus pocus kind of weird things that sometimes we may think. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. Another preface is a lot of this information I got from another class that I took some years ago. Okay? And I want to just set a couple axioms in place. The first one is that our life has a purpose. Okay? If we can't agree on this axiom, then there's really no point in talking. And I'm not going to spend time proving that life has a purpose. We'll just, for the sake of argument and for the sake of this class, we'll accept that as an axiom. A second one is, which is really going to help us towards the end of this discussion that we're going to have, or class that we're going to have, is that every soul has a unique purpose. Okay? But we'll put that on hold until we get later. So those are going to be our axioms. Okay? So when we think of the soul, what's another thing that might come to mind when we think of a soul? Like, what greater ideas are involved with the soul, do you think?
Eternity.
Eternity, okay. So eternity, I think, rings something else for me. Mortality, death, okay. And it's a scary topic to talk about, but we have to understand what exactly is it. So there's a PhD, a doctor. His name was Nathan A. Heflick. and he came out with something called terror management theory. And I'm just going to read right here. He says that it starts with the idea that humans, unlike other animals, face something that is potentially terrifying. The awareness of our own mortality coupled with a desire to live. So we have these two things that go on in our life. Okay. To paraphrase, the co-creator, Sheldon Solomon, says that the awareness that you are destined to wither away to nothingness, and in turn are no more significant than a lizard or a potato, is not particularly uplifting. So how do humans cope with this awareness? Humans cope with mortality by deny their own mortality and avoiding thinking about it. They repress the terror, basically. So this is his theory, and this was his thesis in college. So of course, if you want to, I can share with you. It was an article from Psychology Today. I can give you the place to look if you're interested in reading more about that after the class. But that is something that's, I think, that should ring true for most of us. And I think a lot of us don't really seek to search more in this topic, because as we just saw very quickly, talking about the soul can descend very quickly into thinking about our own mortality. And that's something that I don't like thinking about.
Well, you think about it all the time, then you become very depressed and
Right.
worried, and then you get sick, and you die faster.
It's not healthy.
Right.
So there's one of the great Kabbalists, Rabbi Chaim Vital. He says that it's known to the wise that the human body is not the human being. It is merely the body of the human being. When we speak of being, we are referring to an inner dimension of ourselves. That the body is merely a garment, that the intellectual soul is attired during its sojourn in this world. Okay, this is what he talks about. So we're going to come over here, and we're going to see. We just asked some of us, how do we feel about death, and how do we feel about things related to that? So let's take to a side. Can you grab those books for me? The terrorist ones, please. Just if a couple can share.
Thank you.
You don't not have to follow along. So the first spot is going to be Genesis 2:7, which is page 11. Don't feel obligated. We're going to have a couple other pages that we need to go through. But the reason why I brought these books out for us to read is, they say seeing is believing. So sometimes, I just feel more comfortable reading things inside for myself than listening to someone's talk. So in Genesis 2:7, it says, God formed man of the soil from the earth and breathed into his nostrils the soul of life, and man became a living being. Now in Hebrew, this word soul right here is a key term. He breathed into the man neshama, the soul. So we're going to see what that is. The next text, which you don't have to switch to, is in Genesis 1:24. If you want to, you can. And it said, God said, let the earth bring forth living beings of differing species, cattle, creeping things, and beasts of the earth according to their species. And it was so. So the word there for the living beings is nefesh chaya. Nefesh. That's also, as we'll see, another aspect of the soul that a person has. So we need to remember these terms. There's a neshama, which God breathed into us, so to speak. And there's also a nefesh, which is what he created the animals with. Okay? So it's interesting to note, there's a lot of discussion and modern science. Are we different than animals? So, at a cursory view, we have a sort of a same aspect, right? If anybody has a pet, maybe a dog, your dog wants to be loved, he wants to be put on your lap, he wants to be fed, he wants to be played with. It's something we really can all relate with. I think that's really why we like animals, because they're on one level, we can kind of relate to their basic feelings. But what is the difference between us and animals? So I'm going to move somewhere to a different text, which comes from a rabbi named Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. He was a rabbinic authority and a Kabbalist that lived about 300 years ago. 300 years ago, give or take. Okay? And he says that there's one way in which man is different from anything else that was created. He is a combination of two different diverse elements, namely the body and the soul. So, what is he saying is different between us and animals?
Our body and soul.
Well, animals have a body.
But we're upright.
Okay.
Well, there are some animals that might.
Kangaroos are upright.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question. It may have something to do with this. As far as the word neshama, is sham the root, meaning that it came from somewhere else, whereas the nefesh could be part of the body that it belongs to?
I think
The word neshama is also related to the word neshima, which means breath.
Okay.
Because God breathed the soul. Neshama, neshima. It probably has connection to sham also, because the Hebrew is very etymology. It's all broken down to small words. I'm not sure what if sham plays a role there.
you'll see in commentaries in the Bible that a lot of rabbis will actually have disagreements on what exactly the roots of the words are. Okay, so the disagreement part is not what it's not what we're focusing on, but the Hebrew language is made up of usually 3 consonant words. Sometimes there's 2, okay? But that leaves it open to interpretation. Okay, so you'll see sometimes the rabbis do have disagreements. And, they're all right. Because they're not actually arguing that the verse as a whole is talking about something different. It's just having a different etymology for the word may give a different emphasis. It may give a different understanding. So really it could be, you said sham there, it comes from there. Where that is, we don't know, right? But it could be that it comes from another place. And it could also be true that it's neshima that was breathed into us, right? So, we know that life is very complex. There's no one simple answer. We like to think that there's one simple answer a lot of the time, but there isn't one simple answer. That's actually one of the reasons that I fell in love with Judaism, is because, there is a complexity of answers for a lot of questions. And a lot of times when you research them, you find out that they're not necessarily contradictory, that there's ways that they agree with one another. All right. Whereas maybe other places you don't find such a thing. There's a way that things are done, and that's really how it is. So what Reb Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, I think what he's saying is the difference between us and animals is the fact that it's a soul. He's preempting anything. Don't say that, we actually speak. Well, you can say that, right? Don't say that, we like to go to the movies for leisure and animals don't, right? Because you can get into an argument, well, maybe fundamentally, animals also have leisure. I don't know why I think of this picture, but my one son's really into animals, and we watched this Animal Planet thing once, and there's this group of monkeys that live in, the cold, and, they like to sit in these hot baths, to keep each other warm. That's what utilitarian purpose does that serve? Maybe it keeps them warm, but it looks like they're having a good time, like they comb each other's hair and, relax together. So I think what Moshe Chaim Luzzatto is saying is, don't get into the argument that, on some sort of functional level we're different than animals, because it could be argued that, it's different in degree, not necessarily in its primary function. What he's saying is totally different between us and animals is the fact that we have a soul. We have a neshama. The animal does not have that. The animal has nefesh. We also have nefesh. So in some regards, that's why we have this connection to animals. But what we have different than the animals is neshama. And we'll actually see as we learn that it's more complex than neshama, that there's other places of it there. He says, talk about the first part. It says, when we speak of the man's soul, however, we're actually speaking of two different things. One type of soul that a person has is the same that exists within all living creatures. And it is this soul that is responsible for a person's natural feelings and intelligence. When we say natural feelings and intelligence, we really should have a question, because really I said earlier that the rabbis call something we have an intellectual soul. And right now we're saying that the animal soul is the intellectual soul, which is not what I mean. So when he says natural feelings and intelligence, emphasis is on natural, right? You know, that flight or fight response that we have within us. You know, the feeling of hunger, right? And then we'll figure out how to go find food. These are natural. These are something that there's no difference between us and animals. So, in addition to this, that a person has a higher spiritual component, which is distinct from his animal soul and totally disassociated from it. So to kind of explain a little bit what these two parts are, he's first coming to say that they have nothing to do with one another. Okay? So there are, we know, two different types of intelligence. You know, sometimes, you know, we say, you know, my friend's pretty street smart, but he's not book smart, right? There's different types of intelligences that we live with every day in our life. So he's saying these two types of souls that we have differing types of intelligences as well. So he says that the divine soul is joined to the animal soul, okay, which in turn is joined to the most ethereal element of the blood. Talks about something very physical. In this manner, man's body and their two souls are all bound together. So a lot of times we think about a soul as like, where's the soul, right? Is it hovering above us? Is it like hidden in us? You know, I read something pretty funny that, you know, in older scientific research, you know, I think this is maybe in like the 17th or 18th century, they wanted to try to find the soul. So what they used to do was they'd take sick people that they knew were about to die, and they'd put them on a scale, and they'd wait till they die to see if they got any lighter, right? To see if the soul went somewhere. So we need to recognize the soul's not an object or a thing like a kidney that's within us. So what he explains to us is that the soul is connected to an ethereal part of the blood. It's very interesting, which brings us back to the Torah, which is on page 647. Can I share this one with you? And this is going to be verse 11. Somebody want to volunteer to read?
For the soul of the flesh is in the blood, and I have assigned it for you upon the altar to provide atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that atones for the soul.
So it's very interesting. So we see from a source outside of the Torah that the soul is connected to the most ethereal aspect of the blood. I wouldn't have naturally thought that. I don't know what I would have naturally thought had someone asked me where the soul is. And we see from right here in the primary source of all Jewish traditions, which is the Torah, that God himself says that the soul is in the blood. There's another source on page 1005. And this is going to be verse 24. Psalm 24. You should pour on the ground with water. I think I might have wrote down the wrong source actually. Oh, 23, I'm sorry.
Oh.
So really the overall theme of this is a prohibition. This deals with laws of kashrus, laws of kosher, And it's an overall prohibition against eating blood. But within there's a key term in verse 23 that will kind of give us an inkling into why we don't eat the blood. So it says only be strong not to eat the blood. For the blood, it is the life. Now if we go to the Hebrew, where it says life right there, it says nefesh. That's the term it used. So if we want to translate it literally, it says hadam hu hanefesh. The blood is the life, is the soul, nefesh. Okay? So I think maybe 15 minutes ago when we started this, maybe we had a different idea of what a soul was than kind of what we may have right now. We're going to see that we're going to expand on that idea a little bit, and that I think at the end of this class we'll see that it's maybe we have more questions than we started with, but I just want to kind of get us going in the correct direction. So back to Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. He says, even though the divine soul is often referred to as a single entity, it consists of a number of parts on different levels. We can therefore say that there are actually a number of souls bound together like links in a chain. Just as all these links comprise a single chain, so do all these levels of the soul constitute a single entity, which is called the divine soul. Each of these levels is bound to the one below it, and to the lowest level, which is the nefesh, the animal soul, which in turn is linked to the blood, as mentioned. So we'll see that, it's it's getting murky. There's a lot more to this than we think. So I'm not going to explain these. I can't explain these, but I want to give you the names of what they are. So Jewish tradition says that there's 5 parts to the soul. That they are the nefesh, which is the soul we've established, which is connected to the blood. There's the ruach, which is the spirit, a person's emotional faculties. There's the neshama, which is breath, which is what God breathed into us from the first source that we read. And there's these 3, from what I've been taught, are actually connected to a person in a quasi-physical sense. I don't want to say physical, but in a quasi-physical sense. Then there's other higher levels, which are called chaya, which is the living essence, and yechida, which is a unique essence. And there's just something that I think is a beautiful idea, which is that this level of yechida, all Jewish people share with one another. So, when people say, you're my brother, you're my sister, I mean it very literally. We're all connected in some, special kind of way. So, I think going back to our earlier question, what's the difference between a person and an animal, is going to be summarized by this. A rabbi called the Chizkuni. His name is Rabbi Chizkiah ben Manoach. And he says it like this: God did what he had not done with any other creature. He blew into Adam, which was the first person's name, with his holy breath, a neshama that is immortal and does not perish when the body does. So, as we said, that they're connected like 2 links in a chain, but eventually one day that chain does get broken. And there's a part of the human that's the nefesh that never leaves the earth. Okay, but there is a neshama that does leave the earth. So it's almost as if to say, this is me, I didn't read this anywhere. This is almost to say as if, when a baby is born, it's like the chain is linked together. And that's what the connection is. So, it's very special that what's the link in the chain? This is just an interesting idea that Jewish names are very special and they're very important. When we pray for someone who's sick, we don't just say, hey, God, heal Joe. We want to know what's his Hebrew name and what the person's mother's Hebrew name is. The mother is who carries that person. The mother is the one who develops that link in this world. Very special position. So that's why we connect the mother's name to the baby or the person when we're praying for their health. And we say that there's two distinct things. There's the body, and then there's the neshama. And they're linked together for life. So what connects that? It's the person's name. The person's name is that link in the chain that connects the neshama to the nefesh. So that's just an interesting idea of why Jewish names, I think, are important.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So, okay, so we name our children after loved ones that have passed away. We give them their names, whatever that name may be. So when a person dies and their soul does not go with their body, their soul stays lingering around, and then you name your child after that person, does that then mean that soul gets passed on to that child in some way? That's what I heard there.
Not necessarily. There is a concept of
is that part of the reincarnation class?
Yeah, reincarnation, where souls do come back to Earth, and it could be in another human being, it could be in an animal, it could be in a plant, it could be any form of creation. There is such a concept, but when you name after somebody, a deceased family member, doesn't necessarily mean that soul comes into your child.
No, okay. That's what it sounded like.
But can I add something? Once, like Joe said, the highest level of soul, everybody's one. It's called Yechida. All Jewish souls are one. But even in the levels in between, there's a connection. Just like we understand that we can connect with people, and we have a relationship with somebody in this world. Two people could, shake hands and physically connect. So there could be soul that has a number of links or connections with other souls. Essentially, the Jewish people are at their source 600,000 souls and not more. So really, if one person is connected to one of those 600,000 souls of the people who left Egypt, and another person is also coming from that general soul, even though they have individual souls, but there's a linkage and there's a connection. So therefore, when somebody names after somebody who passed away, even though they don't necessarily take the soul entirely, you wouldn't say that now the soul is not in heaven anymore, now the soul is here, and this child doesn't have their own individual soul. You wouldn't say that, but you would say that there's a connection. So, or there, and that if that person that they're named after really would have a lot of virtue, then there's some kind of influence or connection that this person, that the child had. Now they could tune into that soul, and their soul could connect.
It's like a tiny little piece of that soul.
Yeah, or it's connection. I would say it's a connection. It's a relationship. Things aren't as sharply defined as they are when it comes to bodies. In the higher level, like Yechida, they're not defined at all. It's all one. But as you go up that ladder, the levels of the soul, things are less defined. So to say, well, it's different, but it's just taken from it is incorrect. There's a blurring of lines. There's a linkage. There's an actual linkage. You wouldn't say that this person's soul now is not in heaven, is in this person. However, you do say that there's a connection. This soul is a composite of other souls or and there's a deeper connection between the child that's born and the person that passed.
So we're saying that a soul is eternal; it never goes; it's always here.
They being recycled all the time?
So there's different levels of the soul. There's
So wait, 600,000? Is that it?
Huh?
There's a lot more people than that.
Is that everybody is sort of a manifestation. Really, everyone's just a manifestation of one soul, of the Yechida, the highest, where everybody's really just one. But if on a lower level, where things become more distinct, in spirituality, the higher things are, the more it's reflective of God's oneness. So on a there's a highest level where everything's just one, but then on lower levels of the soul, then there's 600,000 souls, and then that filters down to different people. So you have two different people that on a higher realm, they're really one and the same. They're really connected. Just like everybody, every Jew on the highest realm of Yechida are one and the same. So
well, I think one thing, and I think the question, I'm understanding your question as I think about it and I hear people talk. I think maybe it could stem from maybe a misunderstanding of where the link grasps. So even from a scientific perspective, like say we take the scientific perspective that, everyone came from Africa, right? I guess it had to have come from a couple of people, right? Even the Torah perspective is that everyone came from Adam and Chava. So generally we're starting from the same axiom. If we go with what the basic level of the soul is, which is the nefesh, which is connected to the blood, you and your child shares your DNA, right? So on a level...
And you name your child for somebody that passed away that you're related to,
right.
So they're sharing their DNA.
Right. So we have diverging paths. On one level, we see that this nefesh started with one person to two people, right? That aspect of the soul started with an original couple and then split. So if you ask the question, so there's only 600,000 souls, we can see on one level, on a physical level, which is the nefesh, that it can be split. And I think we would all agree to that, especially when we take the axiom of what the Torah's perspective of what the base level is, which is the nefesh, which is the blood, right? So your one soul, we'll call it, which is the blood. Say you have 5, 6 children, just split into 6, right? So then it does separate. Now another aspect of that question is the higher aspects of the soul. I don't think that I can fully answer that question. I don't think that I know enough to answer that question. But one thing that I think of when I think of that is we do all share an aspect of that as well. And it is possible that there are primary souls that can get split in a spiritual sense as well, just like we can establish that it can get split in a physical sense. So if the question is a concern that, what if, that person, I don't know, had depression or a sad aspect to them.
I think we just want to believe that, when someone that we love dies, that there's still a piece of them around. And that when you name your child after somebody that you love that has died, there's a piece of them in there. And whether or not that soul is connected directly or indirectly, if it was just a loved one that wasn't actually related to you, and I mean, you're still taking that name of that person and you're giving it new life. You're bringing it back into the world, even though it's left.
Right. And I think that's one of the primary reasons why we name people after special people in our lives in Judaism. Right? I think that's why we do that. We do that so that they should carry on that namesake, so to speak, so that they can kind of be like that person was. And another friend that I have has a child, named her Chava Esther after her grandmother. And, the little girl, she's like a fireball. She's always bossing people around and this kind of stuff. And he says, it's funny, she's like just like my grandmother, who I named her after. We see sometimes people are concerned that, they want to name them after a grandparent or a relative, but maybe the relative, wasn't 100% their whole life, we'll just say, right? So they'll add a name on top of that to maybe mitigate what that connection will be. Maybe that person had certain struggles in their life that they fought through, but at the end of their life, they ended off their life in a very decent way, something that would merit being named after, right? But maybe they're concerned that that type of connection of the name could also bring with it whatever baggage was in the beginning of that person's life. So they'd also, add another name. So sometimes you see, I notice all the time. It's one of the strangest things when I first started becoming more observant, which is that when people get called up to the Torah, I've heard some people like 3 names sometimes. It's like, they have like all these names. You're like, wait, what just happened? Did they call more than one person up? I think, but we see that, and that connection of a name is very important. I do want to add a story into this, that there was 2 thieves. One couldn't walk and one had no arms. So the one who couldn't walk, he got on the back of the guy with no arms.
That does not sound like a good pair of thieves.
So they work good together, teamwork, I guess. So they go through a farm. They go through a farm and they're picking fruits off the trees to take home, right? And then later on, they caught these 2 guys, and they said, it's impossible. I can't even walk. How did I come to your farm to steal stuff? And other guys said, I have no arms. How am I going to pick stuff off of trees? And they said, because you were on his back. He was being your legs and he was being your arms. This is the same idea with the nefesh and the neshama. They're two separate things. When a lion eats a person, do we say it's a bad lion? No. We think it's bad, but a lion was only doing its animal nature. Lions have to eat. Doesn't have the intellectual capacity to think, this fine gentleman has a family, or this fine woman has 3 kids. It's hungry. It sees a piece of meat running across the forest, right? A soul, in its most pristine form, from heaven, it can't, eat a bagel, right? So how are people connected through that name? It's like the story I just shared. The soul goes on top of the shoulders, so to speak, of the body. And this is how, when a person slaps another person, right? We say that that's a bad thing. You can't go hit people. If you say that you're an animal, so then what's wrong with, you slapping someone like a dog bites someone on the ankle? There's no difference. You're just an animal, right? We have an aspect to us that we know that's different, right? Another idea that I thought of while you were speaking was, it'll come to me. It'll come to me. So we're going to move forward from this idea of the soul. Okay? Again, my point here wasn't necessarily to everyone to walk out and say, yes, I got the answer I was looking for. It was more or less kind of to develop the question, what was Judaism's view on what that was? And I think so far we've done that. We've established that on a basic level, that Judaism's view is that the connection of the soul is to the blood, right? That's the physical aspect of the soul, almost like a plane, so to speak. And then there's almost like an upward part that comes off that physical plane, which is the spiritual aspect of the person. So we have these two aspects. And those two coming together is what becomes the body and the soul. So now we're going to move more into the part of every soul, that axiom number 2, which is that every soul has a unique purpose. Right? Judaism, as we know, has an emphasis on bodily life. As much as we are, religious, right, and we believe in the next world, and we believe other aspects of hocus pocus, so to speak, for lack of a better term, we do very much believe in bodily life. We believe every act we can do, we can imbue with holiness. We can do something like sitting at a table like this, eating bagels and coffee, can be an act of holiness, right? So a question that comes to me is that, well, how do we reconcile the two? On one end, we're saying bodily life is amazing. We don't want to give it up at all, When a Jewish person, a Jewish man who wears tzitzis, goes into a cemetery, he's supposed to tuck them in as a sign of respect to the departed, because since they're not physical anymore, they can't do the mitzvah of observing the tzitzis. They can't do physical mitzvahs. Out of respect for the deceased that are there, this is why we do that. So, in other words, to me, that says that we have an emphasis on being alive, right? So as much as we do believe that there's a next world and these people do go somewhere, we do believe very much here. So how do we reconcile bodily life versus the immortality of the soul? Well, what's an answer that you think you would have? Anybody? There is a commentator named Rashi, and he makes a comment on the Talmud that says, more precious before God than the mitzvahs are the lives of the Jewish people. God says, let the commandment remain unfulfilled so that this person may live. Sometimes we break away from religion. If somebody is severely sick or ill on Shabbat, which we don't break for anything, you break Shabbat for that person. Okay? So, as much as we can be religious, so to speak, we do say, we will put religion to the side for the importance and the value of a human life. So I think what's interesting is that just makes the question even stronger. Again, how do we reconcile this emphasis on bodily life to an emphasis that we have on an ethereal life? And I think that's going to move us into our next section, which is, we'll say, becoming untethered from the body. So there's Jewish sources that say it's decreed in heaven that this soul is going to belong to this body. And it doesn't want to come. So God has to push it, so to speak. Then when it gets here, it likes it. And it doesn't want to leave. It says in the Zohar, which is the Kabbalah, that nothing is as hard for the soul as its separation from the body. I think this is where things start getting difficult. I think, again, I'll harken back to what I said earlier, is that when we start to think about the soul, is we start to think about death. And it's difficult for us. I just want to recall to mind that terror management theory again. So, there's nothing as hard for the soul as its separation from the body. So I think that it's just very interesting, and it is a difficult topic to talk about. But the soul comes to this world, and it doesn't want to come to this world because it's like in this fine place, pristine. It doesn't have anything, and then it doesn't want to leave. And this is going back to the previous question we just had, which was trying to reconcile the emphasis on life versus the emphasis on the next world. So I'll bring I don't need to open it up. There's a section in the Talmud and Tractate Brachos that says that a person who gets too involved in physical life, their soul leaving the body is like picking string from cotton or picking a hair out of cotton. Now, when cotton gets stuck together, it tears, it pulls. Okay? Someone who doesn't get too involved with physical aspects of life, but in spirituality, it's like pulling a hair from a glass of milk. The separation, the untethering, as we said. So, a lot of it is view. In other words, both people will sit at a table and eat, but what are we doing? Are we eating to quench our nefesh, the animal aspect of us? Or are we eating so that we can make a blessing over the food, so that we could have community and fellowship with one another, that we could share ideas about the deeper meaning of life, which then feeds the soul, the higher aspect of our soul. It's ridiculous to think that, we should go on a mountain and fast for 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 days. We have established in Judaism we care about being alive. Part of being alive is eating, right? But again, a person's unique mission in this world is to uplift the world and make the world a better place. Now, I say that and it's a nice idea, but it's a very broad idea. And maybe that broader conversation will be for another day. But how do we know what it's like to make the world a better place? Is the rules that are laid out for us in the Torah. And, some of them can be dry. Some of them can be difficult. We can grapple with that another time. But the soul comes down here so that it can grow, so to speak. A soul can't grow on its own without doing mitzvahs, without doing commandments. I always had this idea, which is like this. When you're raising children, you constantly do for the child, which is what a parent's supposed to do, right? Can the child really be said to grow? Of course, physically they get taller, physically they get bigger, but emotionally, can they grow if you're always doing, taking care of them?
They can. If they start to if you're a model for them and they start to show the way that you're giving, and then they start to give, then they start to grow.
Would you agree, though, that at a certain point in an adolescent life, that constantly doing for them can be unhealthy or smothering in a way? In other words, if you're still putting your clothes out for your 17-year-old and washing their laundry, can they be said to have grown from when they were 3?
It depends.
Can you back
I
off
think
a
it
little bit?
depends.
Right. So-
I understand what you're saying. You're saying don't do for them as if they were 2 when they're 17.
Right.
Right. Like don't baby them. Just
Right.
like support.
Maybe they, they're still a kid. Maybe they go to school and they, work at the ShopRite bagging at night, right? So they're tired. They never worked before, they never done. So maybe, as a caring, loving parent, you see they had a hard day, so you want to do their laundry. I'm not saying something's wrong with that. I'm saying to the point where it's debilitating for the child that they can't do anything. There's a certain point where
They're too dependent all
right.
the time.
There's a certain point where a parent's version of love, which is giving to the child, can become debilitating to the child. So what happens? Slowly we need to retract from that child until we send them out in the world and they can take care of themselves. This is the idea that I have about a soul coming to this world. When we're in wherever it is that we came from within God, right? We can't be said to grow. How can we grow within God? Okay? What can we do? What can we offer to God? So we come to this world and we grow by building a connection with a parent that's far away, so to speak. I like to say that my relationship with my mother now is 1,000,000 times better than it was when I lived in her house. Because now when I leave and I take care of myself and I see what she offered me growing up, and I'm busy, I have my own kids, and I have my own work, and I have my own things to do. But I set aside time out of my day to make that connection with her. Hi, how are you doing? That's a real relationship. That's growth on some sort of esoteric level between my mother and I. This is the idea of God sending souls to this world to be put in bodies so that they can come away, that they can have that detachment. And then how do we be said to grow in an esoteric, ethereal sense with God? By doing things that he asks us to do, and we can look around and say sometimes, where are you? Taking time out of our day 3 times a day to make that connection. So that's why I think Judaism has an emphasis on life, because there's something that's offered in life to the soul that the soul can't get in the next world. So much so, when we want the soul to grow, so to speak, a deceased soul, we want the soul to grow, so to speak, we do mitzvahs in their name. We learn in their honor. We say Kaddish for them. And that way, we're only doing it for their merit because, if my mother says Kaddish for my grandmother on her yard site, the anniversary of when she passed away, right? How is it that my grandmother deserves anything for that? My mother's only doing it because my grandmother had an impact, a positive impact on her life. So it's in the merit of my grandmother that my mom is saying these beautiful words that are in the prayer. What are we doing on time? So I just want to end starting on a starting point of the next topic that you guys were interested in. And again, remember the axiom is that every soul has a purpose. So we say in Kaddish, I'm going to read a English translation of Kaddish for you. They say, exalted and hallowed be his great name. Throughout the world that he has created according to his will, may he establish his kingship, give blossom to his redemption, and hasten the coming of the Messiah in your lifetime and in your days, and in the lifetime of the entire house of Israel, speedily and soon. And we all say amen. And then we say, blessed, praised, glorified, extolled, exalted, honored, upraised, lauded is the name of the Holy One, beyond all blessings and songs, praises and consolations that are uttered in the world. And again, we all say amen. What does that have to do with a dead person? Sorry for if I said that in a harsh way. Right? But that's what we say.
But when we pray for the dead, whether they had just passed away or not, it uplifts them. Even though they're dead, it uplifts them, and that's why we pray for them for the next world to come.
Very good.
I just learned that, actually.
Very good. So this goes into every soul's unique purpose. So Rabbi Aidan Evan Steinsaltz, in his prayer book, he has a note there that says, every member of the community of Israel is responsible for establishing and proclaiming God's sovereignty in this world. As the verse states in a book of Isaiah, you are my witnesses, God proclaims. Therefore, the absence of a Jewish person creates a void, as it were, in God's sovereignty in this world. In order to fill this void, others need to intensify their work accordingly and proclaim on behalf of themselves as well as the deceased, may his name be exalted and hallowed. So what we're doing is every soul has that purpose. And part of that purpose is to proclaim God's sovereignty in this world. And just by being here, the Jewish people are called witnesses in the Jewish Bible. So when a Jewish person passes away, it leaves a void in God's sovereignty, so to speak. So I just want to mention something. When we talk about the kingship of God, it's not like it is. Sometimes we can use the imagery of a worldly king, but it's not like a domineering, angry type of king. In other words, this king, the absence of one of his subjects, creates a void in his kingship. That's a more loving king.
But he takes us away. We don't know why. We will never know why. But he knows. He knew the past, present, and he knows the future.
Right.
Because he sees everything.
Right. So maybe an answer to that could be that, there is a limit to what a person can physically do. And on a basic level, this again, nothing about this topic is easy, but on a basic level, it can be that the person fulfilled what their physical purpose in this world is. So then it's time for them to move on to the next world, for that next purpose of their soul, which is for other people to say Kaddish. Okay? Again, I didn't read that anywhere. That's kind of my view.
I like that.
Again, I'm not a rabbi, but that was my view. So, again, I'm going to mention the reincarnation aspect. There are views in Judaism. Some authorities don't hold that there is reincarnation, and some authorities do. So I'm just going to read this and then we'll end. So it began with one master soul, which is the soul of Adam, the first person that was created, which included all of the future souls. Subsequently, this master soul passed on to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the matriarchs also, and then was divided among the 12 tribes. The souls were further subdivided into 70 souls that populated the world, and then the soul that went into Egypt, and then the 600,000 souls of the Jewish people that left Egypt and Mitzrayim. And I'll end on a beautiful idea that I heard. What was the idea of the splitting of the sea? In the rabbinic sources, it says that this was the birth of the Jewish soul. And if we think about how a baby's born, the baby comes through the birth canal and comes into the world and leaves its world behind it. When the Jewish people went through the sea that split, it was their way of coming through the birth canal and leaving their old world behind them and coming into the new world, namely the world of Torah and mitzvahs and observance and living a Jewish life. So, with that, I'll end.
Beautiful.
Thank you. And again, I just want to say my intention wasn't to answer any questions, but it was to try to at least solidify what exactly we're looking for. So I hope that you got something from this, and I hope you have a more appropriate question to ask the next time you talk to a rabbi. And thank you for listening to me. It was just as inspirational for me.